This House is in session. Prior to the suspension on yesterday's date, this Honourable Chamber was in standing Finance Committee. To that we resume.
This House is in standing Finance Committee. When we suspended, we were under Head 83, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security.
To that we now revert.
To that we now revert. Let me also remind honourable members and our guests, the Honourable Minister has 5 minutes to respond to any particular question. Our guests would have, or any of the officers would have 3 minutes to respond. Please, as much as possible, stick within the time frames that you have been allowed according to the rules. Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Pleasure to continue our presentation in this Appropriation Bill 2022, where we are presenting the work of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security. Today we have again the team, Mr. Terry Bascom, Permanent Secretary, Ms. Keely Holder, Chief Agriculture Officer, Mrs. Cheryl Morris-Skeet, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Dr. Beverly Wood, Government Analytical Services Director, Dr. Mark Trotman, Veterinary Services Senior Veterinary Officer, Ms. Kimberly Coppin, Financial Controller, Mr. Sherlock King, Manager of Markets, Mr. Michael James, Senior Agriculture Officer, Mr. Glenn Marshall, Senior Agriculture Officer, Dr. Leroy McLean, Consultant, Mr. Wayne Baker, Projects Director, Mr. Orlando Affley, CEO, BAMC, Mr. Frederick Ennis, CEO, Acting, BADMC, Mr. Anthony Bryan, Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority Chairman, Dr. Jamaica Andwele, Manager, Agricultural Services, BADMC, Mr. Robert Saul, Chief Economist Acting, Ministry of Agriculture, and Senator Shanika Roberts-Odle, Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask the Minister and his team a couple of questions, and there are they were in my mind from yesterday and the events of last night and this morning with the Russian invasion of Ukraine brings it forcibly to mind. And it relates to the, I think, very positive and far-sighted decision of the Prime Minister to title the ministry, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Nutritional Security. And with that kind of a mandate, and with strange people doing strange things in other parts of the world, the question I have for the minister and his team is what, while we have a pretty good understanding of food security, I believe, how is the ministry approaching the matter of nutritional security, given that the ministry's, the nomenclature that is used to describe the portfolio speaks to food and nutritional security? And I heard the comments, the information shared about the work to increase crop production and yields and that kind of thing. The nutritional security component, how is the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security approaching that component of its mandate? And I'll ask the follow-up after.
Thank you, Honourable Member. You may recall that yesterday we mentioned the relationship with the FAO and the establishment of the Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger. And under SDG 2, the target is for us to reach zero hunger by 2030, but equally to make sure that we reduce or, as far as possible, eradicate malnutrition. And perhaps I should speak to this in the context of what this is intended to achieve, because I've said before that people who may believe that they are having a well-balanced meal but eating a large portion of macaroni pie and a large portion of rice, 2 pieces of sweet potato, 2 pieces of English potato, a pork chop, chicken leg, and a piece of fish. That in itself is not nutritious, and it's really not a balanced diet. So you can have meals where you'll be overnourished or undernourished. And the Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger is for us to bring about these changes where we work through the stakeholders like the Barbados Cancer Society, the Barbados Diabetic Association, and produce through the ministries that are linked to this, which would be Education, Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Commerce, for us to be able to come up with programs to sensitize people in terms of what they should be eating, set programs within communities, and I've started to engage people like the Optimist Club, and certainly there are others who are involved in plant-based diets that I've spoken to as well. The whole thrust of all this is to encourage people to shift from eating processed foods and packaged foods. I wouldn't call brands, but we are all familiar with the amount of foods that are laden with dyes, etc. And in order for us to be able to transition people from that type of dietary habit, we need to get these stakeholders on board who would lead the conversation, whilst we provide the support for them to be able to achieve the objective of transitioning people and changing their dietary habits to more healthy eating. This, when tied to food security, where we are creating our own seed bank, and I think it is critical. You did mention people doing foolish things in this current day and age. If ever there was a time for us to focus on food security, this is the time, because we now need to forge ahead with the establishment of a seed bank in Barbados, and the establishment also for us to be able to look at how we can create our own hatching eggs. For if there's a supply chain disruption, we can still continue on this work we're doing in conjunction with Guyana. So that once we can get the production, once we can get the healthy food, once we can get consistency in supply, then we will break the back of what we consider to be unhealthy diets and get people to transition to more nutritional foods. And that is where the nutritional aspect of all of this comes in.
Thank you very much, Minister. And please, as the Minister responsible for the third sector, to hear of your engagement with the civil society organizations that are related, that have a direct interest in the matter of nutrition and the nutrition of our people. And I heard you also mention optimists. I'm aware that they're working with children, and I may want to assume that that means you're engaging with the ministry responsible for education as well, so that we get that same kind of push or approach in our school system. I want to continue on the matter of security. What is the ministry doing? And let me just give the preface of what I'm saying. My late best friend, who is also known, one of his best friends is also a part of your team, but he was once an employee of the ministry that you have the privilege to lead. And one of the things he did, and the question is based on an experience that he had, one that I shared, which was the setting up of facilities for growing specialty crops using very inexpensive methods. The question I'm asking has to do with the fact that there are people who have very little capital, but who may want to get involved in the production of food. And as an example, he used shade houses for his sweet peppers, but he didn't use the fancy stuff in terms of the metal and the expensive sheeting. He used old pine and the least expensive sheeting, and was able to make, I think, a decent return, very decent return from that. My question is, I've heard a lot of focus on the new technologies, and I'm wondering if there's any scope in the ministry's program. You have Head 160, I think, which speaks to crop production or increasing crop production. My question is there any scope in the ministry's program that allows for easier entry into crop production using what may be considered by some in this more modern era to be cutting-edge technology? Is there any scope for bringing people in who only have maybe $1,000 and can afford some 2x4s and some of the cheap sheeting for them to start? Is there any facility for that, or are we focusing only on the newer and sometimes more expensive technologies?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. The paper that we are presenting to Cabinet for increased production speaks to the use of shade houses, similar to what you were speaking of. And also we have at the BADMC a small greenhouse that is commissioned to train people to how to grow in greenhouses. The cost of it, once the person comes in under the feed program, the ministry through the BADMC actually carries the cost of getting them started, and then through the Agricultural Development Fund, where we have funds allocated for these types of initiatives, the person can also be given a leg up. So at the BADMC under the feed program, we have facilities to train people, and then of course, once they're ramping up and going to scale through the Agricultural Development Fund, they can be assisted. The Chief Agricultural Officer spoke yesterday about the 25 shade houses that are going to be donated to us by the government of Guyana, and we are also going to be purchasing an additional 25, so we will have 50 of those at the disposal of people. They're very basic shade houses. They're simple, and of course they don't carry all the expensive fittings to be set up. What I will do is invite the Chief Agriculture Officer to respond to this, and then also allow for the ADMC, the CEO acting, to speak to where we are with the facility we have at the ADMC.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, members of Parliament. My name is Keely Holder, Chief Agricultural Officer. As it relates to low-tech solutions, yes, definitely there has to be a combination of both high-tech, high-cost solutions, but the need for low-tech is also very important. And here's why. Because we're a small country, it means that high-tech often comes with large costs. So, for example, we are working with the BADMC to develop a rain-fed agricultural program, which would look at being able to maximize lands on rain-fed agriculture. So this would reduce the cost of the need for the infrastructure related around irrigation, and also currently, because of our water issues, we would need to have systems like that in place. But there are also other types of low-tech solutions that we have been looking at, particularly because we understand that once you set up a high-tech system, it means that you must have a high level of skill. So it will take time for small farmers or small persons to be able to develop that level of skill. So we want to be able to provide a varying set of options where all persons who are keen and interested in farming as a profession can be able to participate in that regard. Thank you.
Mr. Ennis.
Hi, good evening, members of Parliament. My name is Frederick Innes. I am the CEO acting at BADMC. Yes, I think it is. Right. So in terms of the greenhouse training that has been mentioned, we have actually completed the construction of one small structure which is using fiberglass type exterior. Unfortunately, it was finished just before the impact of COVID, and the space is actually quite limited. So we have held back from bringing persons into that space and given restrictions on how we actually do this training. But however, within our online training program, we have introduced the module to introduce persons to greenhouse training and to have an introduction at least to how that solution works within the agricultural sector. In addition, we have also deployed quite recently a freight farm, what we refer to as container farm growing, and we are readying that also to be added once we can. I think now that we've started to ease up on the restrictions, we can start bringing persons in on a rotational basis so that they get the exposure. As the CEO mentioned, it is quite technical once you do get into fully enclosed greenhouse structures. So it is something that you would really want to have persons have a strong understanding before they moved into assuming these things on their own. Even with the cheaper solutions, be it shade house or whatever, it does have some challenges that persons would not necessarily experience in open fields. So we want to make sure that persons get good exposure before they deploy any funds, any capital into this type of operation.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I just want to commend you and your team for the work you're doing. I think, Minister, you know how I feel about agriculture, and particularly your leadership and the experience, commercial experience that you bring to bear for what I think the world is realizing is a very significant but vitally important sector, and I applaud your leadership. Thank you very much for the responses.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to the Chamber and to the members of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food Security. Minister Weir, I want to start by congratulating you and your team. If we look at the record of agriculture in this country over the past 4 years, well, close to 4 years, it's a very good record, and it would be remiss of me to enter this chamber to ask a question on whatever, black belly sheep or whatever, livestock production, root crop production. And don't compliment the team for the sterling work that they've done on behalf of this government. And there I want to start. But having said that, I will go directly into the estimates before me on the sub-program 0199 to stimulate and sustain livestock production through the provision of research and developmental services to the livestock sector. And that program speaks specifically to black belly sheep. This is a pretty important industry, not only important, but a lucrative industry in that we know, and you have articulated it in your sub-program statement, to create a viable industry for high-quality, affordable lamb and to provide hides for the manufacture of value-added leather goods. So we see the importance not only in agriculture, but moving and vertically integrated into industry, using the sheep leather to produce goods for export as well. And I am wondering, looking at your sub-program, where you have allocated in this year's estimate only $260,000 in this area of livestock production, re black belly sheep. And knowing very well that we have a huge import bill of lamb in this country, averaging in the millions. I think it is over 10 million. And someone told me recently it is roughly around averaging some $14 million. So my question to you is, what are your plans to increase the production of black belly sheep, knowing the importance of this, I don't want to say animal, but this key industry to the viability of agriculture and to industry in this country? So that's my first question to you.
Honourable member, before you respond, just let me say to you and the team, we are having a bit of a challenge a bit in hearing some of the responses. So I'm asking persons speaking to come a bit closer to the mic so that we can hear you clearly here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Honourable Member, for the acknowledgement of the work that the Ministry and the team that is working with me is doing on behalf of this country, and indeed for us to be able to reach our objectives in providing food security, food sovereignty, and of course nutritional food. The question you raised on black belly sheep, and in referencing the sub-program in Head 83, we do a substantial amount of research work in livestock, and through the ministry's main function is to provide that type of research and development support. The expansion of the black belly sheep program will come as part of the program's work, and Dr. Leroy McLean is here with us. He's responsible for the black belly sheep program, and I would love for him to respond first of all to what we are doing in order for us to be able to increase the production of black belly sheep in Barbados. And then the CAO would mention the conversation, she would address the conversation we had in Guyana, and indeed what we are putting together in order for us to be able to reach 1 million heads by the established time that has been set.
Well, thank you, Minister, and good evening to the Chairman and members of Parliament. Honourable Member, I'm happy to respond to you to this question. And the first thing I would like to mention is that in your constituency and on the other side in the north, we have a total of 29 farmers so far listed who have between them 361 sheep. And I could assure you that there are many more which we will eventually find once we have completed the work there. One of the problems we have encountered is that we need, first of all, to know how many sheep there are on the island. And you made reference to the amount of money that's allocated to this aid. Unfortunately, last year we had requested funds for a census so that we would know exactly how many sheep we have and then how we can go forward. But that was cut from the estimates. So we were unable to do the census that was planned. But we have moved ahead, however, in doing what could be seen as an informal census, where we get out there and look for the farmers so that we can find how many we have. And so far we have identified 273 farmers who have black belly sheep. And we have a total of, so far, 10,701. And these numbers are changing every day because, obviously, at this time of the year, we have a lot of lambs being produced. And of these farmers, 11 of them have more than 100, and 60 have more than 25. So there's a substantial interest in the Barbados black belly sheep amongst farmers. And it is our intention now to move these farmers from just seeing themselves as people keeping sheep, but as people who can have a viable part of a black belly sheep industry. And this is one of the problems in getting farmers to understand that it is not only about keeping sheep. And I'm glad that you made mention of the utilization of the hides, because we have been told by the experts that the skins from the Barbados black belly sheep make extremely high quality leather. And I always tell people this is not leather for sandals and drums, but leather which is fabric quality leather, which in fact has a greater value than the value of the meat itself. So I quite agree with you that it's a very lucrative, potentially very lucrative area. What we're also doing is that we're embarking on having a rapid multiplication program where we can make sure that we have enough lambs to provide farmers and persons who want to get into rearing black belly sheep, that we can provide them with breeding stock. We also have, as part of the program, a feedlot which will make it possible to, instead of having a sheep out there running around in the pasture all day and not being properly fed, where we can have animals kept indoors and fed. The best example I could give you is if you think of the poultry industry, what is done with chickens, where they have feed and water available to them continuously, and you can get them in 6 weeks. Now we would be able to have a lamb that can be slaughtered in 7 to 8 months rather than having it for over a year. And if 40 years ago someone had told our parents or grandparents that they have 5,000 chickens in one place, they would tell me they're crazy. I think the same thing applies now to sheep farming, where we use more modern techniques for animal husbandry, that we can rear these sheep now in an environment where we can have larger numbers with better quality meat and skins, and also having them available for the market at an earlier date. And this is something that has been proven other places. We see a farm in Trinidad, for example, that has 3,000 black belly sheep. And that farmer only has a total of 10 acres of land. So the technology and the methods are there, and I believe that with the correct approach, we can make the Barbados black belly sheep industry very successful and viable industry in Barbados. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. As it relates to the support to the Barbados Black Belly Sheep program, the Greenland Livestock Research Station is embarking on a number of activities that would support the work that is being done in that program, specifically as it relates to developing more offspring that would have the characteristics that we want to help the farmers to have a profitable industry. In the past, the challenge with Barbados Black Belly Sheep was that the size of the animal, the carcass is very small, and so the profitability was not there. And so we're embarking on a selective breeding program to focus on creating a set of animals and offspring that would be able to have good growth rates when you put them in a feedlot type of setting. So, for example, things that we need to address would be ensuring that we select ewes that are producing all twins and triplets, or quadruplets, for example, ensuring that they're good mothers and that they produce enough milk. So that would ensure that we have less lambs dying, because lamb mortality tends to be quite high. Additionally, we are selecting for rams. Obviously, bigger rams will produce bigger rams for slaughter, but also to ensure that the rams that we are producing for breeding will breed will give more ewe offspring and not more rams. So the selective breeding program is a key part of it, because we want animals that are going to give us the kind of size. The Barbados Black Belly Sheep has phenomenal flavor, yes, but in terms of the meat to bone ratio, they tend to have a lot more bone and not enough meat, and that's where the profitability issue lies for farmers. So we have to address that. We also have, in our conversation with Guyana, and we spoke with a number of the veterinarians there, the head of the vet services department in Guyana, Livestock and Development Services there, but also with Dr. Nicholas Waldron. And one of the things that he mentioned is because that the soils in Guyana are so wet, the animals will tend to suffer from foot rot disease. And so what they've been able to do successfully in Guyana is to breed the Barbados Black Belly Sheep with a sheep called the Texel. And this allows them to get a crossbreed, which would still be able to use the Barbados Black Belly Sheep label in terms of our marketing, but have a breed that would be suitable for the environment in Guyana, that would allow them then to generate the type of numbers that we're going to need to get to the million sheep that we want to do. So on the Barbados aspect of it, we are working on developing the characteristics for the pure lines of Barbados Black Belly Sheep here, and then in Guyana they'll be expanding, but it likely will be a crossbreed with the Barbados Black Belly Sheep and the Texel. Thank you.
Thank you. This is, I hope it's not seen as a challenging question, but based on the research and all that I've heard just now, we usually set targets, and we have that target of 1 million black belly sheep. I would like to know, if you can at this stage, probably not now, but if you can, give us an indication as to when you think you can achieve that target of the 1 million black belly sheep.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We are currently working in collaboration with Guyana and the Minister of Agriculture in Guyana and his team for us to determine how we are going to approach getting 1 million heads in 5 years as the target that was set by the Prime Minister. The paperwork that is being done on that would tell us exactly how we're going to target reaching that deadline. They are doing the numbers. They're also looking at the lands that they would allocate in order for us to be able to do a rapid expansion program. And the CAO already mentioned selective breeding, how we will look at rams that are going to be able to get us more ewes rather than rams. And all that technical work is currently being done in Guyana using the baselines 5 years for us to reach 1 million heads.
Thank you. You answered the question. It's a 5-year period. My final question, I'm going to move away from the meat and the sheep, and I'm going to go to root crop production. This is, it is probably in the estimate, but years ago, I know you sat with me and we were two-thirds with respect to Barbados being self-sufficient in root crop production. And I'm going to ask the probing question: how far are you off from the target of being self-sufficient in root crop production?
Thank you, Honourable Member. The question is definitely a good one, given the fact that we are responsible for food security. Root crop production, as you might have heard previously, didn't come without challenges, be it sweet potato, be it cassava, be it yam. And we've been working with the Home Agriculture Station, with the FAO, to provide clean planting material for these crops. I think we do pretty well with sweet potato. We have had an increase in yam production last year, and we are also looking at how we can best grow cassava. The CAO will take you through the technical areas of it. Yesterday I had Mr. Michael James speak to the whole issue of clean planting material, and if necessary we can go over that again. But I would let the CAO explain where we are in terms of root crops and how we can increase their production.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think we are almost, I would say 100%, or close to 100% in terms of self-sufficiency in root crops. Typically, we have seen more than 98% production in Barbados for cassava, certainly for sweet potatoes. Yam production went up by 42% this year. In the past, we were at about 78% of yam production. Edibles is probably the only root crop that we are less than 50% in terms of production. And part of that is obviously the lower yield and the longer time that it takes to grow. I think what would be a better indicator of where it is that we need to go is how can we now encourage consumers to consume more root crops as the starch of choice, so that there can be even greater growth within the agricultural sector because they're consuming less imported starches such as rice or white potatoes. White potatoes is the largest fresh vegetable import in Barbados. So to make an inroad into that, we'd be talking about more than 3 million kilograms, I think it is, of white potatoes we import. So if we're able to start to do that import replacement now, and not just a case of just reducing the small amount of imports that we get from the OECS countries, but we start to look at how we can replace white potatoes with sweet potato, how we can replace white potato with cassava or with breadfruit. Those would be the things that we would now want to do, and again it would tie in with the nutritional security, because we are also looking at higher nutritional content in some instances with our root crops compared to things like white potatoes. So we are almost close to self-sufficient, but there is an opportunity to do greater import replacement for other types of starches that we import.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the Honourable Minister and his team. I want to first comment on where the CAO just left off, specifically in terms of encouraging more Barbadians to consume more root crops. where is the ministry in encouraging value-added products as it pertains to the root crops? I think that is definitely an opportunity that the ministry could pursue in terms of encouraging more agrotech, and especially with the youth in this country. If you were to walk around in the supermarkets, you would see a lot of imported products. They call them paleo products, and a lot of the fitness crowd is into them. And they tend to be based on the low glycemic crops. Is there a plan to encourage more of that by the ministry?
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your question. We actually, the whole thrust behind what we are doing with working with stakeholders in order to achieve healthier diets relates to the fact that we must be able then to move to agri-processing in a big way. And that is the reason why we are looking to establish a food terminal. And that is the reason why we are also meeting next month with the Committee of the Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger as well, because we definitely recognize that there's a need to engage people at the level where we can provide greater opportunities for agri-processing, and at the same time encourage people to be able to look at the glycemic charts on the packaging as well, and be able to choose healthier, wholesome foods. The ministry is definitely on board as the ministry responsible for nutritional security in making sure that we can move this along, and through the food terminal and the ability to use a packing system and a processing system, we should be able to get more people involved at that level. The CAO and her team, her technical team, have been looking at how we can bring along more people. Certainly she has had several conversations with me about the types of approaches we can use for processing and packaging, and I would hand over to her to inform you in terms of where we are going.
Thank you so much, Minister. As it relates to agri-processing the root crops and agri-processing in general, there are two things that we must note here. First of all, when we go into agri-processing, we typically tend to need varieties that can handle agri-processing. So while at a very small scale level, at a household level, you could take a product and agri-process it and sell it, if you're going to do it at a commercial level, you first have to ensure that you select the right varieties to be able to do so. So things like ensuring that the agri-processed varieties don't have a high water content, the types of acidity of the raw materials or of the fruit or the vegetable. Some of these are the viscosity, things like that. Once you start to agri-process, it will be impacted. So there's work ongoing in terms of looking at what are agri-processed varieties versus what are fresh market varieties. And then the other aspect of it is ensuring that we have enough economy of scale, because once we set up an agri-processing plant, you must have the throughput to be able to provide a lower cost item. If we're only doing 1 or 2 runs a week, it means that you set up a very expensive plant and you're not going to get the throughput to be able to supply. But also in terms of consumer demand, when it comes to retail purchasing, consumers want to ensure that you have, or they want to ensure that they can have their product consistently. So if we put the product on the market today and it's not available tomorrow, then that is going to create a challenge. So we also want to make sure that we have the growers and their capacity to be able to deliver on the quantities that are needed to ensure that that agri-processing facility and the consumer's demand is met. Otherwise, we can see then entrance from other agri-processed products from outside of Barbados taking over. Additionally, as it relates to agri-processing, there are some shorter or smaller term wins that we can look at. The fresh cut market is a huge market right now. It's over a $6 billion market in the USA. And consumers want more processed goods, but they still want it in a fresh form or close to a fresh form. So we have been working with the BADMC to look at how we could design some kind of facility that would be able to provide farmers with assistance in developing more fresh cut products to meet that market space, and at the same time address the health and wellness desire that is coming from consumers. Yes, we see consumers want to eat healthy, but especially when it comes to vegetables, the time for preparation is often too great. So if you can get things that are diced and cubed and pre-sliced, and salads that are pre-packed, and you can get 5 different salads for 5 different days, that would allow you to, and at a good price, that would allow you then to be able to meet your nutritional demands, and that ties in to the nutritional aspect of nutritional security, being able to provide people in a modern time with the types of foods that they need, but that are still very nutritious. Also, as it relates to low glycemic index foods, then we are also looking not only at vegetables but also at fruits. And the Barbados cherry, there is also avocado. We're looking at a golden apple. Those are key low glycemic fruits, and I know that work was already ongoing as it related to looking at the nutritional profile for sweet potatoes, and likewise we want to do more of that work of tropical fruits and tropical foods, and be able to share that with consumers so that they can be informed as to what it is that they're eating and what is the nutritional benefits of the foods that we have here. Thank you.
Thank you for that thorough response. I was particularly enthused by your presentation yesterday, Minister, specifically with the feed program. And as the representative of our urban constituency, when I canvass, and as the Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown alluded to yesterday, there's lots of budding young farmers in these urban communities, and as you canvass the areas, you see people who have gardens in the back of their houses, they're raising chickens, they're doing a lot, and they're trying to lift themselves out of their economic circumstances. And I'm enthused by the feed program and its potential as it pertains to economic enfranchisement for the youth. Now, when I go through the areas, I do recommend that they contact the Ministry of Agriculture and try to get onto the feed program. But there's so many of these individuals that it'd be very difficult for me to accomplish this on my own. Is there a plan by the ministry to engage in community outreach so that we can get to these people who really are very interested in agriculture, and a lot of the young ones to see it as a way out?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Well, that is an easy one because we have already launched the Project CARE, which is the Community Agriculture Response and Empowerment. And that program is designed to get into communities with people who want to be able to do gardens within their communities. The ministry, through the BADMC, and indeed with the support of the BAMC, will arrange to come to the area. We can help with the cultivation services, and then provide you with the implements so that the community, those who are involved in the community, can continue to do the work. Where necessary, we can help supply them with the drips and seedlings, and an extension officer would also be assigned to be able to come around and make sure they're following the guidelines that have been given to them. And if there's need for training, they can be trained under the feed program, similar to what we're doing at Lears. We intend to make sure that every community across Barbados, where there is an opportunity for persons in those communities to be able to do gardening and community type farming, we are supporting them. We've already started that project with some members of the community at Wakefield in St. John. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest is also doing a similar project, and we are working with him. I have pledged my support to make sure that he benefits from the support that the ministry is providing through the BADMC. And indeed, in your constituency, where there are people and there are opportunities for people to do any form of community gardening or backyard farming, we will be willing to support them. The officer in charge at BADMC is Dr. Andrele, and Dr. Andrele is working with a team at the BADMC where they can come out and look to see what it is you have, and then we will determine how we will give you the support that is needed. I really and truly want to make sure that we don't miss anyone. Our mission here is to make sure that we can bring everyone along, and therefore I would want for the BADMC to provide clarity on how people can get involved in the feed program particularly, and also through the BADMC and the BAMC, how people can seek support for Project Here. There must be by now an opportunity for enrollment online into the feed program, and therefore I would want Dr. Andrele and CEO Acting Mr. Innes to provide for you and all honorable members and indeed the public of Barbados an opportunity to hear how people can easily and seamlessly sign up for the feed program and for Project Here.
Thank you, Minister, and I look forward to working with you on that. Now, for my last question, as you're aware,
Remember, I was giving the opportunity to hear.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
From my colleagues.
Yes, Honourable Member. In terms of the access to the feed program and to care, what we have done is provide the access through our website. I will acknowledge that whilst the interactivity of the website is not yet at the scale we would wish, we're hoping to have a relaunch of our website in probably 4 to 6 weeks, which will allow for a more interactive application process and persons being able to submit directly. But in the interim, the access is there. There's a capacity to send the application to our officers directly via email, and we are accessible online. We also have a WhatsApp access available to persons such that they can reach out to us electronically in that form as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I would wish for, if at all possible, for Mr. Innes to share the WhatsApp number and also the link for the website.
You may proceed.
Yes, sir. The website for the BADMC is www.badmc.org. The WhatsApp number, I will confess I do not have it readily to hand, but I will see if I could provide it within another 5 or so minutes whilst the member is still raising his next question.
Okay, thank you for that. For my final question, Minister, as you know, my father was a big agricultural importer, but he was also a top chef. And he would call me on days to acquire inputs to his latest creations. And he would always emphasize that the quality of the dish had a lot to do with the quality of the inputs. So he liked his food rich, so he would use a lot of tomatoes. So that would be factoring in heavily on his shopping list. So when I would get ready to send him the products, he would call and say, make sure that you do not send those imported tomatoes. I want local tomatoes, because the imported tomatoes taste like water. So the thing about the local tomatoes, they have a lot of flavor, and they make the dish really come out with that richness. Now, the issue with local tomatoes is, as good as they are, when the rain comes around, say about October, the yield tends to drop off tremendously, and you hardly have anything at all. What is the plan for the ministry to ensure that our top quality local tomatoes that could probably challenge even tomatoes on the French markets, that they are accessible to the Bajan public year round, so we don't have to rely on the watery tomatoes from overseas?
Honourable Member, I'll take that question. tomatoes are a very interesting type of crop in Barbados because, as you rightly said, the yield drops off in the wet season. And actually, when you look at the import of tomatoes in the food import bill, what it doesn't tell you in terms of the total amount is that it's actually in those at that period of the year that we're importing tomatoes. And it's because that it's a combination of it getting very hot, and the day and night temperatures are close, and so the flowers actually drop off. And so the answer for that, and which we do have a few varieties here that perform well, but it's also for us to do more work in sourcing more heat-tolerant varieties. We know, for example, FA 3019 is a pretty reliable seed when it comes to being able to tolerate heat tolerant or being more heat tolerant. We also seen a couple of plum varieties that were able to withstand the temperatures and what goes on in the wet part of the year. The other part of it, which we have seen farmers doing, and sometimes maybe they move away from, is the staking of the tomatoes, because once the tomatoes are close to the ground, that would also impact on the diseases, particularly bacterial blight would tend to be an issue, and there are other soil bacteria that cause some issues. So part of the program would be to provide more education or training to farmers through extension services to help them to understand or develop the skill to apply the right techniques and use the right types of varieties to be able to produce during that time of the year. But varietal testing on our agricultural station is going to be the key thing that will help farmers, because the more varieties we can test and provide to them the ones that are the most effective, that is where the biggest intervention is going to come, that would help them then to grow in that wet season. Also, as we continue to push and encourage them to use more mulch, it would reduce the impact of those same soil bacteria causing problems. So these are agronomic interventions in terms of helping farmers develop the skill and the capacity. There are a few growers who have become very proficient at it, but the intention is to develop more farmers who have that kind of skill to be able to do that in the wet season.
Thank you. I'm obliged to you, Chair.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Minister, let me start by thanking you for the extensive work that you and your ministry would have done in the constituency of St. John. If I may, Chair, I just want to single out Mr. Athley and Mr. Eversley for the work that was done at several plantations in the constituency of St. John. To name a few, Wakefield, Huttersall, I think Malvern is now on the cultivation as well. As you know, Minister, I have about 32 or so youngsters who are engaged in a project at Wakefield, Project Phoenix, under the FEED program. And my question this evening revolves around training. Your chief would have mentioned in brief just now about the processing. And the fact that we have 32 youngsters that are farming at that particular location. We also have BAF that is on the cultivation as well. I am concerned and I'm interested in starting some processing in the constituency of St. John. I know that there will be a lot of work that will entail in terms of having a location, but I do have some existing buildings within the constituency that I believe can be pressed into a plant. My question is in relation to starting the process of training the value added to the agriculture that is happening in the constituency, because if not these youngsters who are directly involved in the process, then there are other unemployed individuals within the constituency that I can see this being a major plus. So I'm just wondering if training is something that can take place in lieu of finding a location and setting up a processing plant. In addition to that, Bath, to the north of the existing, the former herb station that was there, there's some land, and I'm getting some requests in relation to sheep farming. So my two questions for you would be, one, the training for the understanding that at some point in time processing could become a part of the landscape in the constituency, and what is the process in terms of sourcing land at Bath for sheep farming? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your very valid question as it relates to looking at how we can do processing in St. John. I actually have a passion for St. John. It's a very scenic parish, and I would do anything possible to be able to assist with moving the residents or constituents in St. John along in agriculture. We would have to start work with Export Barbados so that we can look at how we are doing the processing. We create opportunities for us to be able to export some of what is being processed. I am prepared to get the BADMC to get on board to start a program where we can do training in agri-processing as well, and to add that to the feed program so that when you have farmers coming off the feed program, the BADMC is already required to take 40% of their produce. They still have to find market for the other 60%. We know that we agreed in Cabinet that government's procurement is supposed to take 60% of locally produced agricultural products, and therefore we would want to then be able to combine these and come up with a solution for processing for the constituents of St. John. I am happy to note that there are buildings available that can be pressed into operation, and we can continue a conversation to see how we can look at developing such a program. Bath, the land you mentioned at Bath, I would ask the BADMC to look into that because this can be a very tricky one. I recall when we were developing the feed program, by the earth station, my understanding, if I am not mistaken, is that land is privately owned, and we did seek to enter into an agreement to lease that land. We can go back there because livestock farming is already taking place there, and I have a number of other persons who have requested land at Bath to do livestock farming. We do need the mix because once we can get livestock farming with crop production, then we have natural fertilizers as well. So I would want the BADMC to respond to you in terms of the land for livestock farming, sheep, black-belly sheep farming, and to speak to the land by the earth station.
Yes, good evening, Honourable Member. In regards to the land mentioned at the earth station, we were able to get some confirmation that they are privately owned lands, but we have, through the ministry, we'll be working to engage with the owners to see if there is scope to pursue these opportunities there. What we can say, however, is that we have at Bath identified some other areas where we are proposing to allocate towards the livestock maintenance. At this juncture, we are working towards having some of those lands cleared and identifying how we can move those forward. But at present, once we have the names of the individuals who are interested, we would work to at least start moving them forward as best we can in those ventures. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, I've been seeing a tremendous amount of activity along the Turner's Hall area and some evidence of cultivation, certainly in the Rock Hall, Bardens area. And it's quite heartening to see an area that was pretty much bush transformed into agricultural land. My question, however, it has to do with the short-term and long-term plans for the development of that area, given the amount of activity that is now taking place down there. My second question has to do with the Highgates area. You made mention of a national orchard being established in that area. What I would like to know is what was the considerations that led that or informed the establishment of this orchard, given the challenges we have had in the past in that area with different fruit types, and if any consideration was given to perhaps the introduction of cash crops in that area, and if there's a issue with fertility of the land, some form of crop rotation for that part of the Scotland district.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your question. I want to give you the assurance that at some point I would want for my team at the BADMC and you to get together to discuss St. Andrew and the work that is being done in St. Andrew. I do know that we have farmers from the feed program who are being placed at Bordens. We are actually developing the water supply over there. And at Walker's as well, I know that there are some farmers over there who have been given assistance through the BADMC. The Highgates Orchard, Highgates was known for many, many, many years for producing a wide variety of local fruit. And the Barbados, or the Bajan cherry as we refer to it, is one of those that we had in abundance at Highgates. What we are trying to do is to redevelop the orchard there. We do have the reservoir to be able to supply the water. I think when we started to recognize what climate change has been doing to agriculture in Barbados, a lot of the trees and the fruit trees that were part of the orchard, we started to lose them. There wasn't proper fencing, and so animals came and grazed down the trees as well. We are basically re-establishing an orchard there, but an orchard with a major difference. And I've asked the CAO to work with the team at Soil to be able to give us an orchard that is going to have a fair amount of appeal, including appeal to our tourists when they visit the area. I will ask the BADMC to respond to the questions about Walkers and Bordens, and then let the team, CAO, and if we have Soil here, to speak to you about the orchard at Highgates and how we are utilizing the lands at Highgates. But yes, there can be an intercropping sort of farming that can take place there, where you do trees and you do other things like legumes, etc. So I will go to the BADMC and then come to the CAO to speak to you about the orchard that we are developing at Highgates.
Yes, good evening, Honourable Member again. In regards to, you mentioned Highgates, Turner's Hall. As you indicated, we have started to place a number of farmers from the feed program into those areas. You mentioned the short-term and long-term plans. What we have tried to do in those areas is to identify suitable crop systems that would not degrade the soils in the Scotland District area. So where possible, we've introduced such systems as apiculture, such that the beekeeping serves to improve the capacity of the plant growing in those areas. We've also tried as much as possible to introduce the fruit crop production, such that those lands and those trees can maintain the soils for those areas. Where we have done clearing, we've been very careful to work with the Scotland District Authority and the Soil Conservation Unit to identify those slopes that are under the recommended 15 degrees so as not to create issues once we have rains in those areas. And the clearing has been done again with the Soil Conservation Unit on hand to ensure that we are not creating issues as we move forward. The other key element in terms of the long-term development, as we place those persons in those areas, the main focus is persons who are resident or are close to that area, so that they do have some vested interest in maintaining and developing those areas in an appropriate and adequate manner going forward. Thank you.
Honourable Member, as it relates to the plans for the area as well as the orchards, I'd like to first talk about the nature of the Scotland district. And remember that, or you should be aware that about 50% of the land in the Scotland district is actually sliding or slipping, and there's some kind of erosion going on that could be significant. And that's why we actually had set up the Scotland District Soil Conservation Act to protect that area. And yes, there's been a lot of agriculture that was done with it in the past. The concomitant side of that, especially when it is not done in a way that is sustainable, is that the budget of soil conservation then has to increase to then shore up the areas that are slipping and sliding, because we are clearing too much of the land and leaving it exposed, which is then leading to greater land slippage. So there is this balance that we have to find in the Scotland district. Now, as it relates to the Haggart's Orchard, one of the things that is not often commonly known is that at Haggart's, it was actually a research station for fruit trees. And this was the basis of a number of the orchard areas. Now, we are working on a design that would see all types of local fruit being grown in the Haggart's Orchard, which will double as both an orchard for and a tourist attraction, but it would also be the source of the planting material, because soil conservation is very critical for providing fruit trees to farmers. And these are grafted fruit trees or budded fruit trees that typically will grow in a year or less. If you take a fruit tree or a seed and you plant it, or if you've done like my dad and you planted a lemon tree, it might take 15 years to bear. But when we do budding and grafting at soil conservation, you can get fruit trees starting to bear within as little as a year. So the orchard has also served as that source of material that we could replicate more plants and more fruit trees to be able to provide to the public. And in fact, we never have enough. And there's ongoing work that needs to be done to be able to supply more fruit trees. And we do supply a huge amount of fruit trees to the Million Tree Planting Program. So as it relates to the Haggart's Orchard, we are developing that. And we want to ensure that there's enough fruit tree planting material, and particularly for the Scotland District area, where the planting of fruit trees, especially large trees, will be critical for stabilizing the land in that area, which would then allow for areas which are below the 20-degree slope, because areas higher than that 20-degree slope, you get more slippage in that area. So areas below that would then be ideal for vegetable and production and type of row crop production without destabilizing the lands in that area. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. And also thank you, I'm glad that it was raised that the engagement of residents within that area, within close proximity of the Scotland district will be engaged at some point. In fact, one of my questions would have centered around the medium used to engage persons within that space. I know you've mentioned your website, mentioned your WhatsApp number, but may I humbly suggest that perhaps another medium of communication is introduced, because most persons, and certainly the ones that I would have engaged with, are not familiar with the WhatsApp number, nor are they familiar with the ability to access the web page. So going forward, I would suggest perhaps another form of, PSA or some form of communication is used to reach those persons who may have the ability and they want to engage in this form of agriculture, but are not aware of the process in which they can get involved. But as I said, I'm heartened by the development of that area, and I'm thankful for your clarity in explaining the rationale behind the establishment of the orchard. Thank you very much. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I would want to use this opportunity, Chair, at this point in time to allow the BADMC to go over the website information and at the same time share the WhatsApp number so that persons can reach the BADMC if they want to enroll in the feed program or need assistance for community gardening. And I wish to assure the Honourable Member for St. Andrew that I intend to allow for him to have a working relationship with the team at the BADMC.
You may proceed, please.
Yes, sir. In regards to the website, I'll just repeat again. It's badmc.org, and we can also be reached via WhatsApp, 826-0712. Our main number in the office is also an access point, and also through the Ministry of Agriculture, they are very happy to refer persons over to us and facilitate that contact. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you very much for the privilege to be able to make my small contribution this evening. But at the outset, I'd like to highly commend the Honourable Minister and his team in the Ministry of Agriculture for the strides that they have made thus far to help to rekindle spirits in the area of agriculture. I know it's a massive ministry, and there are many critical areas for which it has that responsibility, and therefore I want to say how thankful I am, having seen their performance last year, particularly when we were doing the food packaging and so, to help those persons who were unable to get out and fend for themselves in the heart of COVID. And I think that that was highly commendable. I want, sir, to find out from the Honourable Minister and his team through you, sir, if the Ministry of Agriculture has synergies in place for working with our schools and our community development department, meaning the Ministry of Education. And of course, everybody knows that I like to go back to the past, because if we don't have that platform of what worked well for us as a people, then we cannot pass on those values, the mores, the activities, the skills, and whatever to our youth. And therefore, I've made that query because I can remember very, very vividly as a young child, and of course it happened across the length and breadth of Barbados, where all schools, whether they were primary or secondary or private schools, despite the limited or the vast amount of land that was available, they always had programs in agriculture to engage young people so that they can start to develop skills and to be able to grow foods flowers, all forms and fashions of agriculture to be able to become productive citizens. And of course, we all know that when that food was planted and reaped, those children were able to take home some. They were able to help, parents were able to get to cook more nutritious meals and so on. Now our schools are smaller because I know when the primary school which I attended had 705 children and the plant is no bigger today, it doesn't even have 200 children now. Our secondary schools were not as big when it came to numbers, but I am saddened to see that with all the space, and I believe, yes, there should be space for physical education. That too is an integral part of the health and the development of human beings. But I'm seeing all forms and fashions of things growing in the schools, all kinds of trees. And yes, we need trees, but I am not seeing the agricultural lots that will help to be the training ground for our children and our teachers and other parents, because parents are integral to the whole exercise to come and assist the children to be able to work towards planting food and flowers and so on, to be able to enhance the environment, but also to grow the food that they will be able to do the eating. I want to indicate specifically, because I know now that Barbadians have become very particular, but the children played an integral part in the entire exercise, and they did not have tools like what we have today. They didn't have spades and so on. They probably had a hoe and a cutlass and a fork. But the children were intimately involved, even if they brought an additional pants or shirt, to be able to get involved in the exercise, because it develops an element of appreciation for agriculture from the very young in our society. And therefore, I want to find out what exactly, where are the synergies with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Community Development, and indeed any other ministry, because if we are looking at the training ground and preparing our youth for the world of work and for the world of becoming productive and for the world of eating healthier, acknowledging that we say Barbados is the capital of amputations, I would wish to know, having looked at the wonderful objectives I saw and the strategic planning and so in the ministry, I'd like to find out what plans there are going forward, if they are not in place yet, to be able to determine how our children, our students at university, our students in the secondary schools, how they will be preparing for such. And I close on this one so that the distinguished members can answer me in relation to setting up programs, competitions, interactions with the students and other persons from the Ministry of Agriculture and others who will be in that field, and so that it can help to develop appetites, because once the children grow the foods, they get some things to take home that they can prepare